Hi, everyone. Welcome to this co-production of WION and Voice of America. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani, live in New York City. Let's jump into our first story. President Joe Biden fielded reporters' questions for nearly an hour on Thursday with detailed answers on foreign policy with a full-throated defense of his resolve to continue running for president despite questions about his mental state. President Biden spoke at the end of the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., where leaders agreed to concentrate on concrete moves to bolster Ukraine's ability to fend off Russian aggression. White House correspondent Anita Powell reports from Washington.
The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
President Joe Biden knew that this, a media appearance before a hungry press barraging him over his political future, would be a major challenge. It was preceded by a major wobble just minutes earlier, in which he introduced Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by his nemesis name.
And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. You can beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway. Mr. President,
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
On Thursday, at the end of a packed day of meetings at the NATO summit, Biden took questions for nearly an hour and attempted to soar above his recent rhetorical stumbles and focus on what he sees as the biggest challenge of his presidency, supporting Ukraine against Russia's onslaught. He took credit for what he described as success.
During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved.
But he also acknowledged the challenge the American presidential race has become after his disastrous debate performance last month. He described his poor performance then as a stupid mistake, but reiterated his belief that he will beat former President Donald Trump in November.
I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again.
Questions about Biden's ability to stand up to major global challenges have been a whispered undertone of the Washington summit, marking the 75th year of the NATO alliance. Alliance members have made several concrete moves to shore up Ukraine, including a plan to bring coordination of the conflict under the purview of NATO instead of Washington. And publicly, many leaders have dismissed the doubts over Biden's fitness.
I have absolutely no concerns about the capacity of the current President of the United States to lead his country. And to lead our fight for Ukraine and to lead NATO. And I think this summit speaks tons and volumes for that.
Some analysts seem to agree.
I think it was a good day for Mr. Biden, the best day he's had in quite some time. Will it change the course of the stream, or will it just be a stone in the stream that diverts the current without fundamentally changing its course? I don't know.
On Friday, Biden faces another grueling test. He returns to the campaign trail with a visit to Detroit, where he will court the people whose approval he needs most: voters. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
Joining us now with additional analysis is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She's live for us at the White House. Hi, Jessica. Let's talk about NATO a little bit. This summit, a communique, took its strongest stance yet on the role of China and how it's playing in the Ukraine conflict, basically saying that Beijing poses, quote, systematic challenges to Euro-Atlantic security. What explains the change in tone from NATO, and what message is this alliance sending?
Well, there has been a big change because remember last year the communique basically held out hope that Beijing could play a constructive role with some of its peacetime efforts and trying to create peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. But China then in the past year has deepened its, quote, no limits partnership with Russia, refused to attend a peace summit that was held for Ukraine on the grounds that Russia did not participate. And since then, NATO has decided to call Beijing a, quote, decisive enabler of the war in Europe by giving Moscow what it needs politically and what it needs in terms of materiel to prosecute the war in Ukraine. And Jens Stoltenberg said that this is the strongest message that NATO has sent to China in terms of its contributions to what he called Russia's illegal war. And In response, Beijing's mission to the EU said the summit was filled with a Cold War mentality and provocative lies and smears. Susan?
And at the same time, we're seeing Washington take steps in the region to boost deterrence against China. And NATO is also boosting ties with its Indo-Pacific partners as well. How does all of this fit together?
Yeah, so yesterday on Thursday, many of the meetings between NATO partners were also with the IP4, the Indo-Pacific 4 countries, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, which they have been growing increasingly close to in terms of strategizing, not bringing them into NATO, but facilitating more conversation and more cooperation in terms of overall positions on countries such as Russia and China that attempt to take over other parts of the world by force. And NATO recognizes really, and it's very clear from the communique that NATO does, recognizes that European security is tied to Asian security and that it's impacted by Asian security. Washington last week announced a plan to upgrade its fighter jets in the Air Force in Japan at the 2 bases there at a cost of $10 billion, and they're retrofitting 80 fighter jets. One analyst telling VOA that this will help us U.S. allies keep up with China's progress in militarizing and increasing its Air Force, modernizing its Air Force. Beijing now currently the 3rd largest Air Force in the world behind Russia and the United States. And in the short term, the effort really relates to protecting Taiwan, of course, against Chinese aggression. And that's a key aim of the U.S. government, something that would impact the world if the semiconductor industry alone were impacted by such a conflict. As we've seen, Chinese jets and warships are increasing their activity around Taiwan. And we've seen Washington also seek Washington is also seeking to allay conflict around Japan's contested islands with China and Russia. So that's a factor here as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Jessica, please do stay with us. I'd love to get your thoughts on our next story from your colleague, Scott Stearns. U.S. President Joe Biden is rejecting calls by some leaders of his political party to step down as its candidate following the debate with former President Donald Trump last month, in which Biden sometimes struggled. If Biden is not the Democratic Party nominee, who would be? VOA correspondent Scott Stearns looks at some of the contenders.
President Joe Biden says he's in this race to win.
I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president.
Following his debate struggles late last month, some leaders of his party are calling on Biden to step down as the presumptive Democratic nominee. But after months of voter primaries and caucuses, the Democratic Party cannot force him out, says University of Virginia Center for Politics Director Larry Sabato.
There is only one way for a nominee to be removed, and that is for the nominee to decide not to run before the convention, to open it up, to let the, in this case, Democratic National Committee set the rules for the convention.
If Biden does step down, Vice President and running mate Kamala Harris would top the list of Democrats to replace him. Harris says Biden is the party's nominee and demonstrated her loyalty by slighting Trump, who has split from his former Vice President Mike Pence.
Note, between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, only one candidate on that stage has the endorsement of his own vice president. Joe Biden.
Harris, as the party's presidential nominee, might help with independent voters, says University of Southern California political science professor Christian Gross.
The one thing with Kamala Harris that I think makes her a little bit more electable than Biden right now is if you look at the polling, there's more independents who are undecided about her. So she can persuade people in a way that Biden maybe can't persuade people to move.
Also on the completely unofficial list of people who might replace Biden is California Governor Gavin Newsom. He too says he's backing Biden and showed his support campaigning for the president's re-election in Michigan last week.
I care about, results and outputs, and he's produced. And so, I'll leave more objective minds to judge that. But I'm not looking for a performer-in-chief. I'm looking for a commander-in-chief.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is among those discussed as a possible Biden replacement. She, too, says she's still backing the president. Whitmer won re-election in an important swing state and is popular with national Democrats for supporting labor unions and efforts to combat gun violence.
Week after week in America, we see grim, familiar headlines. Every place you can think of, every situation you can imagine has been shattered by gun violence.
Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is less known nationally than Newsom or Whitmer, but he is a popular governor in a southern region dominated by Republican politics. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker hosts this year's Democratic convention and has the personal wealth to self-finance much of what would be a last-minute presidential run. And then there's former First Lady Michelle Obama, who has consistently rejected any notion of running for office, but who remains popular with many voters. A Reuters Ipsos poll last week showed Biden and Trump in a tie, but Michelle Obama beating Trump by more than 10 percentage points. Sabato says there's no way she's running.
She's much too smart after 8 years in the White House to want to go back, much less to be president. So, we could speculate about names all night long, but what matters is who has the intense ambition, the ability to raise money, and the opportunity to put together the kind of coalition that could produce a majority in the convention.
If Biden stays in the race, that speculation about other names may carry on through next month's Democratic Party convention in Chicago. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still with us live from the White House. Jessica, there's been a lot of talk about President Biden's campaign for president, but what about former President Donald Trump? What has VOA learned about whether he plans to cut the size of government under a plan called Project 2025?
So this Project 2025 originates from a very well-known conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation here in Washington, in partnership with a number of other conservative and right-leaning organizations. And it's basically a roadmap to shrinking the size of government by using government and basically equipping the Trump administration, should it take office, with executive orders, with training, and with other means to hit the ground running and within the first week of the presidency shrink the size of government. Things like getting rid of the Department of Education, the U.S. Agency of Global Media, which oversees Voice of America, and other conservative, other agencies that conservatives have long wanted to get rid of. Essentially, this does address a key failing of the early parts of the Trump administration, which was that it was in complete chaos. They couldn't get enough appointees. This is designed to help them to actually execute on a policy promise that conservatives have wanted. But critics say that it is a threat to democracy. It will concentrate power in the hands of the president, and it will be against some of the constitutional values of a balanced government. And this is something that Trump has denied being associated with, but the organizers and those who have generated this Project 2025 say that it is very much inspired by his policies. So this is something that VOA has been looking into, and of course it directly impacts us as well at Voice of America.
And what about the Republican National Convention? It begins next week. What can we expect from that?
Yeah, so RNC Chairman Michael Whatley has said that the convention is a chance to show Trump's strength, contrasting it to Biden's governing style. And of course, the goal of the convention is to nominate the Republican nominee, to make that formal announcement. And of course, that person will be Donald Trump. We also expect to see Donald Trump name his running mate. His vice president could be one of a number of potential people, including Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, and the host committee estimates about 50,000 people are going to come to Milwaukee, which is the site of this nominating convention. Wisconsin, of course, a key choice because it's a key swing state. Out of the last 4 presidential elections, it has chosen the ultimate winner of the presidential election. And it's also got a key constituency for both of these candidates. 80% of the voters are white. Poverty levels of Milwaukee specifically, especially among the youth, are over 30%. Biden has tried to shore up his credentials with exactly this type of population, sort of lower and middle class working whites, and it's something that he's gone to great lengths to address. He's made a number of visits to Wisconsin. He's also got a lot of union backing, and this is a key union constituency. And for his part, Donald Trump has gotten a lot of votes from the same population as well with his trade policies, his America First trade stance. So it's going to be an interesting few days next week to watch what happens. We'll see if there's any unexpected drama, but certainly seeing Trump take the nomination once again and having a little bit more with Project 2025 potentially in place to govern will be an interesting set of things to watch and analyze for all of the political nerds here in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be watching as well and following. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.